What's up, guys? I'm Bind and I have a coffee problem, as you might have noticed. Anyway, so listen. Today I want to do the most basic, most straight to the point tutorial that you've ever seen. So, how come, you ask? Well, I have done plenty of tutorials, very long ones too, and they are rather complicated, talking about a lot of stuff. But most recently I was on the YouTube and I saw a video that had like over 1 million views, claiming to be the best tutorial for beginners and all that. So I watched it and I don't know, guys. I didn't thought it was particularly good for beginners. Guy was explaining DPI and all of that jazz, and half the stuff he was saying was like half knowledge and half wrong, stuff like this. So I thought to myself, you have just finished teaching the 25th semester of bachelor students how to draw, so you might as well do a very basic tutorial. So let's get into it. Yep, there is again. So guys, what are you going to learn today? Today I want to paint an image and I want you guys to do it along with me. I'm going to show you the principles of what I think is the most important step-by-step stuff that you should pay attention to. It's not going to be some tricks. It's not going to be my style or some fancy brushes or some niche or anything like that. We're going to keep it simple and to the point. Now, we'll start by going into the app of your choice. For me, that's Photoshop because that's the industry standard. But what I'm showing you today is going to work in Photoshop, in Clip Studio, in Procreate, any of those. They will all have the same brush logic. They all have the same layer logic. Some stuff is called different, but you will figure it out. So without further ado, let's get into Photoshop. Alright guys, we are in Photoshop, or the app of your choice. And the first thing I want you to do is to open a canvas. The way you go about this is you say you want a new canvas, and then what I want you to do is I want you to create it via pixel count, not via any of these other metrics. Just select pixels and type in the pixels manually. And I want you to create a canvas that has 4000 by 3000. It's a very traditional photo frame. Going to paint a little landscape. And the other thing that you need to pay attention to, only in professional programs though, not I think in Procreate or some of these tablet apps, is make sure that you select sRGB IEC as a color profile. The reason for that is, you don't need to know that in detail right now, but the entire internet, every app, social media, everywhere you might show your art online operates in sRGB. So I want you to select that. That way what you see will be the closest to what the others will see later online, right? Hit create and the canvas comes up. Number 2, we need to set up the UI. What do I mean by that? You see over here the stuff I have open. You need the stuff that you use a lot, you need to open it to have it at hand at all times, just for convenience. Because if you don't, you will go into the menu and search for stuff all the time, and it will be a huge waste of time, huge downer for your motivation, and it will just not be intuitive. Okay? So what I have here and what I recommend you have is a version of the color picker, the layers and the brushes. The rest is not that important. So you're getting these by just selecting the corresponding windows here. The brushes, color layers, you activate them, those windows will pop up and you can arrange them on your right side of the screen in whatever fashion you want to, right? That's really not important. The important thing is that you have them. All right. Number 3, what brushes should we use? I said that before in the intro. We're not going to use any fancy brushes or any of that stuff because it is a huge distraction in the beginning and you will constantly ask yourself, do I suck or is it just the wrong brush? So I want to take the brush out of this equation entirely. So the fancy brushes you might have opened, like me, I have my own library, you close that over here, and then what you do is you open the very first brush category, which I think is called basic brushes, something like that. And in that, there's only round brushes. And these are the brushes that we will use today for this tutorial. In case you're not sure what they do, you hover a little bit, they will tell you. This is the hard round, for example. If you want more information, you can show the brush stroke. So let's stick with this for the sake of this tutorial. And now, excuse me, I want you to select the black color and I want you to create one layer. We have a background and then we have one layer. And now I will tell you what brushes do you need today. The first brush you need is the hard round that does nothing but paint at 100% opacity. If you put down that brush, make it fairly big, you will see that all that it does is this. This is going to be the first brush that we use. The other brush that we use is going to be the soft round with applied pressure. So I will demonstrate. You push down more, this is what happens. You make it even bigger. You get more opacity if you push down on the pen. And if you're only doing very faint strokes, you get some kind of a blending effect. Every artist, every digital artist uses some iteration of this brush just to blend, to make stuff a little bit diffuse, to express fog and maybe round shapes. So this is going to be the second. It doesn't matter if you use this or that, pretty much the same. And then the third brush I want you to use is this one. It is a flat, hard round that respects pen pressure also. So it looks like this. And if you push down more, it will produce a darker stroke. And if you release, you can layer it like you would a marker on paper, right? It's the third brush. And then I have one optional brush for you that we're also going to use. And that is this one. It's the same as the hard round, but the difference is that this now reacts to pressure via diameter. So if I put it down softly, the diameter is very thin, and as I push down, it gets thicker, and when I release, I get the thinner stroke again. So that way I can express thin and thick strokes intuitively. These are going to be the 4 brushes that we use today. And what I want you to do now is you pause the video, you create a new layer, and you experiment with these brushes until you know exactly how they behave. It might take a few minutes, might take half an hour. As long as you need, just take your time, experiment with these brushes, only these 4, and then when you feel that you know what is happening with these brushes, you come back to the video. So see you in a bit. Number 4 is a small number, and those are shortcuts in your app. What I want you to consider is that now that you know how the brushes work, it is a pain in the ass, excuse my French, to go into the menu and select the eraser and then select the brush and then search for, where even is it, the eyedropper tool, right? And then over here, and then take the color and then go back to the brush and then paint that color. It takes a long time, it's very unintuitive, and it interrupts your process all of the time. So I want you to consider 4 shortcuts to have a better workflow. And those 4 are: first, the brush, which you get in Photoshop by pressing B on the keyboard. Secondly, the eyedropper tool, which you get in Photoshop by pressing I on the keyboard. So not E, it's I for some reason. So that way we can take a color, press B, paint the color, press I, take the color, press B, and paint the color. Very fast. The third shortcut I want you to have is the eraser. And this one you get it by pressing E. Press E, select the brush of your choice, and erase away. Note that the eraser works with all of the brush tips. You can have this one as an eraser, you can have that one as an eraser, or you could have this one as an eraser. Whatever you like, just switch to it and erase. And lastly, the 4th shortcut you need to have is go a step back, which in Photoshop, depending on the version, is Control Z or Control Alt Z. So you press this on the keyboard, you're going back all of the steps. It's very useful. I don't think I have to explain why that is useful. So also all of these bindings, B, I, E, and Control Z, you can put them on your graphic tablet directly if your graphic tablet does support it. That way you can just push the buttons on your graphic tablet and be very fast and very intuitive. That's right, I switched to water. Having too much coffee, I guess. It's getting late here. Anyways, guys, last number 5. I'll explain the layers quickly. So now that you know how the brushes work and you had some practice and you know that you should have some shortcuts and you have your UI ready and all of that, you go over here, you have these layers, and when you start out, there is nothing but a background. So I want you to erase all the layers that you just utilized and just go back to a plain white background. Now, what we're going to do is, and what I need you to understand and really understand is, there's ways to utilize the layers in order to paint or do editing or anything else. What I'm teaching you today is an approach where we view the layer as a layer in space, like in a diorama. So that means the last layer in the back will be your sky, and then layered in front will be the background, and in front of that will be the midground, and in front of that will be the foreground. First of all, let's create some layers. You will need 4 layers in total. That means 3 additional layers that are not your background. So now, what I was getting at, the layer on the bottom is the layer that is last, that is behind everything. And this layer on top is in front of everything. So they, from front to back, they layer from top to bottom. This is in front, that is behind that, is behind that, and that is behind everything. And of course this makes a lot of sense, since you cannot create layers below the background, since the background is the furthest back that it will show you. Okay, so what that means is we are now ready to paint a little image with these 4 layers. Why 4 layers? Because it will allow you to just do pretty much have a huge advantage through the layers. As I just described, to have your sky separate and to have maybe your midground separate. And you will still not lose sight of the layers. You will not have 20 layers and they all have fancy effects and stuff, and you will not know what they do. So what else do you need to know about the layers? It's very easy. Today we will use only one blending mode. If you go in here, you will see what is essentially layer blending modes. What does it mean? It means the content changes with a certain effect interpretation by these subcategories. So essentially the normal layer effect, what it means is that the layer will tend towards 100% opacity. If you put down a stroke with 100% opacity, you will get, if you have a brush selected and not an eraser, that is, you will get a brush stroke that is 100% of opacity. And you can check that by switching off the background, and you will see that the background pattern is not shining through the brush stroke. So the brush stroke is opaque. For another brush like this one that I told you also to use, it builds up the more you push down. And now we check it and you see that it starts transparent, but it builds up to 100% opacity if you push down the hardest. So that way you have the full range, and whatever color you use, it is just the same for every color, and you get 100% of the exact color that you selected over here, which is not true for most of the other blending effects. So what else do you need to know about these blending effects? In general, I can quickly explain this for you. They all do one of 3 things. They all either darken the layer somehow, or brighten the layer somehow, or modify color in a specific way. That's what they do. And you can find that out by watching other stuff, tutorials, or just experimenting with it. But for now, let's forget about that. Because guys, let's face it, one of the most important thing when doing this, and that's why also one big reason for me to do this tutorial, is explaining to people what they don't need. Because these programs are so complicated, a lot of people get lost easily. So not only will I tell you today what you should use, I will also tell you what you should not use. So the only other setting we will need today is the transparency lock. And it's this first checkerboard symbol. If you push the symbol, a lock will appear over here. And what that lock means is, now the content on this layer, you cannot change the pixels that are already on this layer. It will lock what is already on the layer. You can paint over now what is already on the layer. I will demonstrate. Let's take an entirely different color. I have a brush and I did the transparency lock on this layer. Now I start painting over here. Normally I should see a brush stroke, but I don't. And the reason why I don't is because there's nothing on this layer down here. And it will only let me paint where there is already something on this layer. So if I do a brush stroke through this whole thing, you see what happens. You cannot paint outside the boundaries of this layer now. Now, if you think one moment about this, it will immediately occur to you that this is a very powerful tool to have. Because imagine that I paint something very complicated, and then usually on traditional media you will have to pay attention that you're not going outside of bounds and that you respect what is already there, and it's a huge pain in the ass to paint around it. Digitally, you don't have this problem ever if you know what you're doing. You just lock that complicated layer via this, and then you can paint away very complicated shapes onto the shapes that are already here, and you will never ever have to worry about painting outside of the shape that is already there. Alright, now delete this layer again and create a new layer so that we're back on the 4 layers, and now we are ready to paint. Now, what you can do, and what a lot of people will recommend you starting out, is to paint in grayscale. And of course that's always possible. If you want to do that, go ahead. But what I want you to show today is the next best thing, and that is painting monochromatic with one tone that you basically use different versions, saturations, bright and dark values from that tone. So in order to do that, I will choose a blue tone, and then we'll stay inside of this palette basically for the entire time. So we have our 4 layers, and the first thing I want you to do is to fill in the background layer with a sky color. The sky color needs to be rather bright. You can do this with the paint bucket. It will just dump the color, or you can do this with the hard round. You choose a big brush. You can just paint away. There is no limit to how big your brush can be. Remember that, it's digital. So we take a very bright sky and a blue sky because it's supposed to be daytime. And now what we have to do is we have to consider the topic, and the topic, I will choose it for you. As I said it before, you can very well do this along with me. So we will have the view from a hill onto a cityscape / town, and then we'll have some mountains in the back and the blue sky with some clouds, and that's what we're going to do. So next thing is we need a foreground, and the foreground you can paint it with the same hard round. Let me quickly show you. So for this we take now a dark tone, because the way this is going is in front it has the most potential for contrast, and in the back it has the least potential for contrast. So everything looks more different in front and more the same in the back. That's a basic rule of like how do you call that, atmospheric perspective, right? So we'll take a dark tone, and then what we do is we just paint a shape. And again, you can use a bigger brush, do a shape, fill out that shape. So what we're doing now is we are painting silhouettes. So this, you can either do it with this brush or you can do it with this brush, which will give you more control over the thickness of the brush. Also, you can erase from the brush, from the layer I should say. So what we're aiming at to get is the silhouette of a landscape, right? And maybe there is a tree, and maybe there is also a person in a second. So as just a reference, I would say. So I'm erasing stuff from this layer, and I'm also adding to the layer. And for now, we keep this layer unlocked. And you can, of course, also paint with the lasso tool, right? So that is something you can do. So we'll bring a tree. And this tree, I paint it with the hard round that allows me to go thick to thin. And you will figure out why this is a good idea, because that way you can express branches very well. We can erase from that, we can add to that any way we want to. Now, I said you could paint with the lasso. How is this going to work? Basically exactly the same like this. The only difference is that you are defining the outer shape and then you're filling it in. So why is this good? This is good because all these round brushes and every other brush that you might possibly choose in the future as well, they have an outer shape which you cannot alter, right? So if you have this brush, you will always get a round edge. If you paint something, you will always have a round edge, and it will not look particularly reasonable in some shape languages. You sometimes want to have a harder shape. So for this, then you might choose a brush like this, which is harder, or you will just do a selection via the free lasso tool, and you see how erratic I can be here with these shapes. I can really do whatever the hell I want to, and I will always have a nice, very hard edge to that selection, and that will help me express certain things more easily that I will otherwise will have to select different brushes and a lot of erasing and painting and counter erasing to achieve the same look. So I'm drawing a tree with the lasso tool. Of course, yes, you can absolutely do this with a brush. It's no problem. It's just a matter of preference. So of course, if you have some experience like I do, and you know what will happen when you're doing this, it's kind of like a little bit of a glimpse into the future. And now we fill the shape, and in case these jittery lines are annoying you, you can of course hide them with Control H, and you hit Control H again, it will show them. Now when they're hidden, it's still active, of course, and you will have to deselect by just using the lasso tool and clicking outside of the canvas. But this way I can just make this appear and not have the nasty distraction. Now again, if I want to deselect this, now it's deselected, and now erase what we don't want, and we can continue painting. And I can still paint with the brush. I can still add to this, as you can see. So I can still paint new branches and do all that stuff. So the lasso tool is just a variation. It's like a custom brush. We can think about it like this, right? Now that we have this, I said maybe there is a character. So what that means is that maybe here, over here, we put a guy. And painting silhouettes, something that is pretty important in painting, because it really a strong silhouette makes for a strong image, is what they say, right? So in this case, this guy, he just gets the jacket, and that's pretty much it. If we can counter erase the shape, we can do that. So anyways, we will have the guy, and then we proceed to the next layer, because we don't want to linger too long on one layer. So next up is we're doing more of a midground. So we need something to look at, right? So in this case, first thing we need to be on the right layer, which is a layer behind this layer, is one layer down. And then we need another color, which basically it doesn't matter which color you choose right now, because we can still lock the layers later, transparency lock the layers, and just paint them with a different tone, as long as it's just one or two tones. That is really no problem. So we can basically, what was that? We can basically try out the tones for now. And then see what we like. So next thing is, I said we need something to look at, right? So that means we also need to decide where the horizon is. And for this, in this case, we'll make it very simple. We put the horizon in the middle of the canvas, right? And most of the time, I shouldn't say that, but it is never a bad idea. It just can lead to repetitive image making if you always do that, right? But you can decide that more freely once you get a grasp on perspective, right? But for now, let's keep this in the middle. We could put it down, up a little bit. It really doesn't matter. There's no frame of reference yet. So then what we do is we decide what is on there, on this layer. And that is a cityscape, as I said it before. And for this cityscape, we can paint it with the brushes. Now that means we could just use brushes like so, and they represent buildings, right? Now they don't look like buildings, you might think to yourself, and you are correct, but of course we need to, for that to happen, we need to shape them, right? That means we need to counter erase a little bit here and there, shape them, even also maybe use the lasso tool. This sometimes happens when you hold down shift, and you will connect the dots by just holding down shift. Also, in case I didn't mention it before, you hold shift, you can just draw straight lines, right? So that's the reason why I did it there. That makes this a little bit easier for you. But what we need is, we need now a strong silhouette for a cityscape. And what do I mean by, you can do this with the lasso tool. So having a lasso tool that is geometric, as you can see, this will let you do all kinds of different shapes. I should say all kinds of different rectangular shapes, right? And why is that good? It's good because that way you can lay down geometric rectangular shapes very fast and very efficient. Do this a little bit more. And then the same Alt, if you want to fill this, you can do it. And now we have something that starts to look like a city, right? We can also erase from this with that same lasso tool. Now, why would we want to do that? The reason is maybe there is holes in this architecture and maybe it's not the same everywhere, right? Maybe there's illuminated parts which then we can cut out of it that way and create a nice illumination effect. But I'll show you in a second, right? So imagine that there's some stuff that is just, first of all, from down here we can simply erase some of the stuff. But then maybe there's also stuff that is like a road that gets light shone upon its surface, so therefore it is brighter again. So now if I erase this, see how I get this impression a little bit. Now don't make a mistake, because these are holes now in your architecture, and if you don't want them to be holes, what that means is that you would have to either paint behind them or just fill them with something. But since we erased it, it doesn't make sense to fill it with something. I will do one more layer, just temporary layer, to show you something. So now I'm painting behind this with a brighter tone, just like so, maybe even more saturated than this. And that way I can render this a little bit further. So now what this means is this is a full tone. It has full opacity. So see that? It's not transparent. It just looks transparent compared to this other tone, but it's really not. So, and then again, we can do this with the other brush if we want to. We can still leave some blanks if we want to, that I will just do that, and then later to show you what is the advantage or disadvantage of that. And then what we can also do is we can now make really big decisions in the landscape to just decide where it's illuminated and where it's not. So now, just like that, we have the impression of a landscape that is rendered in two tones with that city. Now when I'm okay with that, I can combine these two layers by just highlighting them both via shift and then right clicking, merge layers, and then we're back to 4 layers. So and then just like that we can of course continue painting, and I can now paint over this with the same tone. I can of course also erase, right? I can erase stuff that is very erratic looking, and then I just select with the color picker, I select the tone that I want, and I can continue painting on here. I can also lock this layer and then continue painting that way. So that of course will also work. Can make changes in the architecture here. Can do this freehand or not freehand, that's up to you. And we can also do stuff like this and then select the other tone and then counter paint that other tone, right? So we don't only need to do one thing. This is all now free painting that I'm doing here. But for now, one more thing, there's a perspective to that, and maybe that perspective is usually has a vanishing point in the middle. So what that means is that a lot of the sides of these buildings will vanish towards that, and once I'm doing that, you can see that all of a sudden the buildings look much more 3D than they did before. So that's right, fine. Nothing happening over here. So yeah, that is something to maybe also take into consideration. Also over here we have a round building. It's not fully rendered. Now you can see that you can do lots of stuff just with one tone. It doesn't give me this antenna. Alright guys, so next thing we need is we don't want to linger too long on this. Of course, if you see something that you want to do it, but by all means we need to move on some time, right? So then what we do is we come to the sky next, because there's one more layer left. So and this layer, there needs to be now clouds, and the sky needs maybe a little bit rendering, because now it's just one tone, which is not so exciting, to be honest. So in this case we will need to bring up something there. Now for the sky, it's pretty simple. I want there to be bright clouds, and now these you could paint them, right? Just like so. You could also paint them with a lasso tool, which is what I like to do usually. And then of course can make this a little bit more exciting by basically choosing now through the white what is illuminated in this image and what is not. So what helps for that is to choose where there is a light source, of course, because now I will act like the light source is coming from here. And that way upper left part of every cloud is illuminated and the lower right part will not be illuminated. So I can just like that I can make a better I can in my mind picture the rendering of the cloud a lot better, and that's a decision, by the way, that needs to be made sooner or later anyway, so might as well make it right now. Same rendering technique for now. Can hide also the selection, bring up the sky, see if you like it. I think it's okay. And then what you can also do is staying on that same layer, you can make the same logic, because a cloud is just like a solid object, right? So it will have illuminated side and a shadow side. So now we draw the shadow side. A way to do that is basically the same way. So we can just select a side. Well, that will block this out, but it doesn't matter. And then everywhere now we select, it will be shadow in a second. So for this case, and then maybe down here it will be like so. I don't know if this will work, but we'll see in a second. So it's kind of a focal point where the most stuff is going on. And of course you can also render the cloud more 3D by selecting areas that will be a shadow cast onto them. But don't make it too complicated in the beginning, okay? So let's see how this looks. What we need is, of course, we need now a darker tone, that is also not as saturated as the sky, because it's the shadow of this object that is in front, and everything gets more towards that sky color until it all blends together. So everything that is in front is slightly less saturated than that. So if this is the cloud and this is the sky, we need a tone that is further down here possibly, and then render with that the sky shadow, as you can see, right? So now that is still the selection active. I will now deselect it, and you can also of course paint this just with the round brush and make this more defined. That is up to you, of course. And also back here we can do more and more cloud rendering. In here the same, can just do this some more. And now you can see that of course we also paint over what is here already. So that is then becomes the challenge now, that we need to see how much we want to cover up what is already here. And then maybe you can use the same technique and paint behind that if you want to, that we did just a second ago, and then come back and combine these layers. So we could do it just like this. Forgot a little area here. Everything is not perfect in nature, just remember that. And then we can combine it again and we are fine. So now you think to yourself probably, wait a minute, there's a horizon still and there's air between this and the horizon. Now if there is a horizon, there either needs to be a land mass, a mountain, a hill, or there needs to be water. So since this is already looking a little bit like water, I would say maybe make this water, right? But before we do that, there is something going on with the sky that we can still do. So since the sky is still just one color, we can use a little bit of a blending, an atmospheric blending, because what usually happens is that the land like reflects light from the ground onto the atmosphere. That means the sky is getting brighter downwards and not darker actually. So but you will see this in a second. So the other brush that I recommended you guys is this one for the blending, and we will now use this much more. So use this fairly big. You have your sky color, and then we just select a much brighter sky color. Now we're going towards white here, but you will see what happens in a second. When I'm blending over here, you see that now all of a sudden the sky becomes a lot more alive, and I can of course also do the other extreme. I can make it brighter but also darker. So I could use a more saturated sky over here and bring this up, and now you see what happens here. It gives a nice dynamic, right? So both of these we can do, and now we can even do the same with the clouds. We have these clouds, and now if I lock them, I can blend over them, right? So same way as with the sky, I can blend now over these clouds. And you will have to find the tone that produces a nice result here. But I'm sure, yeah, this kind of looks cool, because this is now like, it's a see-through effect over here. And then can make the clouds darker, and we can also blend the clouds brighter everywhere, of course, like towards the other side, and that way we get a dynamic in there. So now this looks much better already. Now that we have this, what we can do is we're painting on the sky, and we're trying to get this horizon right. So the reflection or the water, it will be always darker than the sky, but it will take all the color from the sky. So therefore we're looking for a darker version of that sky color to render that water, so to speak. So first thing we need to do is to get rid of this line, and then I make a new selection. There is just, we're painting now on that background, but really you don't need to have the selection. I'm just having the selection so that I can blend freely and it will not influence this. I'm taking the darker tone here, and I'm just starting blending this. If I hide it, you will see what happens here. We just did more and more of this blending, and then what you can also do, even without any selection, is we can imitate kind of that tone from the clouds and bring that a little bit into the water. And for this now we can take one of these brushes, right, one of the pressure sensitive brushes, and see what happens if we use these. We get more of a painterly look now. Okay, so just like this, you can bring some of that color from the clouds into what is supposed to be a body of water now. And then also, of course, do some rendering on that and make this then slightly darker or brighter. And it usually gets darker towards us because, again, contrast is increasing, right? So now that we have a representation of this, let's go back to the foreground, because you don't want to be stuck in one thing for too long. So let's go to the foreground. Let's lock the foreground and introduce a second tone to the foreground. Now we're painting a brighter tone onto the foreground, and this is the tone that we have, and you control that just with the eyedropper. And then I now take a very unsaturated tone that is also much brighter to bring up illuminated areas here. So wherever I think it's illuminated, I can now render this layer a little bit. And the first thing I want to do is, wherever I think there's stones, I want these stones to have an illuminated area. And also some not so illuminated areas. And again, not only can you do this with a brush, you can of course also do it with a lasso tool again. And then what you can do is you can specify other stuff. For example, you can create a pathway that tells the story of how the character got here, maybe. And of course I can also counter paint this by just selecting the other tone with the eyedropper. And then of course we can also utilize the lasso tool if you want to, again, to paint. And we can do something very interesting with that. And this can of course make the rocks much more hard edged. And also you can blend this then later with the soft round. I'll show you this in a second, and create some nice effects through that. Now, that way you can control the intensity better, and it makes for a more intricate rendering of that scene. So what we can also do is we can introduce a darker tone, which would be good by now. So the darker tone would be very close to black right now, and also saturated. And once again, I can paint this tone in. And most of the vegetation will be darkest, because that's just how it works with vegetation. It absorbs the most light. But also see that we can paint shadows for these rocks, for that stone. We can imply things over here. And if I want to add to this layer, I just unlock it and I can paint more vegetation over here, which is also nice thing to have. And then I'll just lock it again and continue painting and making bolder decisions here. So remember, the light is coming from here. So taking this into consideration, we can also paint more with the lasso tool, more erratic stuff like the vegetation, give this tree shadow. Right, little shadow here. Let's see. Most will be in the shadow. Light is coming from the back. Yeah, upper left and back. Of course, that is for you to decide. You do what you want. Even following this exactly, you can still make subtle changes to the choices I am making, of course. It's not... if you understand it, that doesn't matter. So let's see. Now we have rendered some of the tree, and again it works the same with the brush. And with the brush you can also make subtle, more rendering strokes in here with the branches. Do some of this really dark, and you will have maybe almost a convincing tree. So then the same thing, of course, goes for down here. You could make now much more shapes that will also have some vegetation. The question I get a lot is like, how do you render grass? And the answer is you don't. You just show where the light is hitting the border of the grass or the shadows of the grass, and then that's how you communicate the grass. And then the second thing is you communicate it tonally, and most of the time it's dark and people paint it too bright, and that's why it doesn't work. All right, let's try this here in a second. And then we'll do... Why am I using the lasso tool so much? It's very easy, guys, because you can paint the same thing, of course, just with a brush, but it will just take longer than if you're used to or if you're good at using the lasso tool. Now see, and you can be fainter, and then this will be more or less convincing. You can even leave stuff like this be painterly on purpose, right? I will do this, and then I will show you what else you can do. You can do, of course, blending with the same black color. You can blend over everything now, and see how this will give a more natural feeling to the entire scene. And you can also do the opposite. You can also, of course, make everything brighter, but you should be very careful, but because if you blend over everything, you see this degenerates very quickly and will give a terrible artificial look if you do this too much. So then after you do this, you can then still continue painting. And also let's do this with that normal brush that reacts to the pressure again. Yeah, I called this the rendering brush for a reason, because now see how you can just take color and then continue painting, and then you can do this. And if you're fast with this, that means you are making a decision, and then immediately you get the brush that you need for that decision, and then you can continue painting, and it will make the whole thing very intuitive. But what you need for that is you need to practice. So there's our guy, and then maybe, yeah, here you can render stuff more. That will take you practice. I could now do this for hours and hours and get a nice image, but that is not the purpose of this exercise. The purpose of the exercise is to show you how to do it and make you understand how to do it fast. And also what I really want to drive home is here is that you can absolutely do a lot with the round brush. I mean, just see what we did within half an hour while talking. So it is, if you cannot make the round brush work, you will not make other brushes work. So the brush is not the problem solver here. So last thing we do here before we wrap it up is we do some changes to the middle ground, and basically we do similar changes here. I can lock this and I can blend onto it, but before we do that, we can use the rendering brush again to just really make stuff a little bit softer and a little bit more defined. And I can introduce new shapes into this, right? And do stuff that is really nice and makes the scene more readable, right? And how obsessively you do that or how much you render is really up to you. You can make the argument that what you don't render is just in the shadow. And I think that's, yeah, it's very realistic thing. It happens that way in reality, and it will look good as long as you make it kind of consistent. Don't forget to lock the layer if you're rendering over here. So, and what you need to do to make the illusion work is you need to understand how to imply stuff and then let the detail fall off into the distance or into the shadow, right? And don't be afraid, you cannot really destroy a lot, because remember, we are in digital and we have basically unlimited tries here. So just have at it is my what I would say always, and yeah, see where you end up at. So that's, you see that even if that is vague, it still can work just fine, right? Now, once you are, now let's do a little bit more of this ground. Once you are satisfied with how this looks, what we're doing is what I just was getting at. We're doing a little bit more of blending, and we're doing this with the sky color again. I mean, it's all the same color anyways, just different saturations. I'm now doing a more saturated version. I don't want it to get too dark though, but I just want, you see, to tone it down over here, and then maybe a little bit in between, make this a little bit less evenly distributed tonally, which makes it automatically look more natural, right? Give this a bit of a shadow here, and then of course the other thing is true too. We can make it a little bit brighter in some areas and achieve a little bit of depth that way. So, and when are we finished? I would say we're finished whenever we say that we're finished. Is the old argument. So we can do this just a tiny bit more and then call it a day. Let's see. To be careful now because I did not lock this layer. But yeah, the advantage is that now I can render this some more. Yeah, but sooner or later we need to call it quits. I give you one more bonus layer, and that is for some cliche birds. So yeah, let's say birds come from down here, maybe going towards the sea. And the way to do birds is pretty simple. You just need to get shapes that look a bit like birds. Let's say that a lot of triangles, a lot of yeah, that and you can't be too regular with the shape, else it will not look natural, right? Also, bird is getting bigger towards the camera and smaller back here, even smaller. And then at one point gets very tiny, and then it's good to arrange them a more erratic way. It will make it look a lot more natural. Now we just grab the big brush and some white, and we make these appear. And also respect the atmospheric distance, more saturation here, less in the back here. Don't make it all the same tone, the same white. That means we can also change tone. So yeah, and then eventually you could lock the layer and then render the birds some more, which will look like this. Now we take maybe a darker tone, and then that is the wrong brush, and I need to lock the layer. So we could just do something like this. Now you don't see it because of the other tone. Is something you need to take into consideration, of course. So there's something you can do with those birds. And yeah, just so that you indicate some shadows on the birds. Now, if you're satisfied with this, of course you can also move the birds around, right? There's no rule against that. But now, yeah, we have a fully rendered image. And yeah, we could go on and on. But guys, I think we reached the end here. 4 layers, 1 tone. And yeah, let me know if this worked for you. So guys, thanks for joining me for this session. I hope I achieved to do what I set out to do, explaining you from zero and in a very comprehensive manner how to paint a basic image without a lot of distractions, right? That was really the goal here. Of course, you can take a million brushes, a million layers, a million layer effects. But guys, doing this in the beginning, it will distract you so much that, and I know this from first hand experience, because when I started in 2005 doing digital painting, there was nobody at art school to teach me how to do this. So I made all the mistakes, and I went down all the path that ended nowhere, and made this a very painful for me to learn how to paint digitally. So hopefully this helped you. And if you now feel inspired and motivated, there's a lot of other videos I did that basically pick up where this left off, and you will see some similarities, but basically my other videos are a little bit more advanced than this. So yeah, let me know down below if this worked for you. You can even link me your Instagram or your pictures that you got yourself from doing this process. Anyways, guys, thanks for joining. See you next time.